Hi, today I'm going to tell you how to apply computer vision to warehouse environment. My name is Teemu Sormunen and this is my master's thesis on the topic pallet detection in warehouse environment, which was done for Wärtsilä. In the thesis there are 3 different research questions, but behind these questions there is one common theme: how to succeed in a computer vision project for industrial applications. Below the actual end result of the thesis can be seen. An object detection algorithm is used to detect the pallet's location and to predict whether the pallet is empty or it's full. The presentation will walk through how to get to these results. The presentation goes as follows. First, I will introduce why the thesis came to be as it is, and then I will introduce the problem along with the research questions. After this, we will go to the methods section, where we will see the theory that is required for understanding the thesis results, which leads us to implementation details. There we will go through the practical details of how the thesis was implemented. Then it's time for experiments and the experiment results, from where we can draw the conclusions that will end the presentation. Let's move to the introduction. The goal of choosing the thesis topic was to find the most useful application for computer vision that could be used in the warehouse environment. The direct results of the thesis could then be used in the application, and general computer vision best practices could be used in future computer vision projects. As the thesis was implemented from scratch without any data, the insights from data collection would be valuable in the future. The use case that was chosen for the thesis is as following. In the image, you can see conveyor belt that is attached to assembly station. The assembly station is used for assembling motors, and the conveyor belt is used for bringing parts and tools that are used for assembling the motor. The upper line that is shown with the red arrow is used for bringing the tools and these parts to the assembly station. After the tools and parts are used, the pallet is moved to a lower lane, from where the pallet is taken back to the warehouse. The pallet is brought and taken by automated guided vehicle, and the automated guided vehicle is commanded by some warehouse worker or some assembly station worker. In the application, the goal is to detect whether the pallet is full or empty and the pallet's location. This information could then be used later to automate the automated guided vehicle even further, such that assembly site workers wouldn't have to worry about commanding the AGVs, automated guided vehicles. The main research question in the thesis was, does YOLO v7 algorithm predict a bounding box with at least 0.5 intersect over union with a pallet and classify the pallet with over 90% precision and 70% recall? The research question is dense and it's really precise, such that the language and the terms used in this question might not be familiar to all of the listeners. We will be going through the terms intersect over union, precision and recall, and YOLO v7 and bounding box in the later stages, but for now let's take it as it is. The main goal of the thesis, the main research question anyways in the thesis is, can we detect the pallets and classify the pallets from full and empty well enough that we can use it as for the end application? In other words, can we use YOLO v7 algorithm to classify the pallet as empty or as full? The first research question mainly considers the direct benefit gained from the thesis to the end application. It considers, can we get something out of the thesis directly? The second and the third research question are more broad, and they consider, how can we do these kind of experiments in the future in the best way possible? The second research question, what is the smallest subset of the data needed to train the YOLO v7 model to classify with 90% precision and 70% recall? This question is relevant because we are capturing the data with camera, and usually the camera produces a lot of data. From our end use case, where the pallets move on the conveyor belt quite slowly and quite rarely, it is very important problem that we need to subsample the data somehow. if we would use all of the data, we would need large computing resources and we would need to annotate a lot of data. The third research question: how should the data be subsampled such that the maximal performance of the YOLO V7 model is guaranteed? This question then considers on how should we subsample the data. Given that we have a lot of data, we want to find the frames that are informative for us. We are going to compare two different approaches. The first one is uniqueness-based sampling, which tries to find the unique images from the video. The baseline is then the constant sampling, and the constant sampling is trying to capture every nth frame, such that we take every second frame, every fifth frame, or so on. This constant sampling is treated as the baseline, and the unique sampling is treated as the sampling that should be better. Then let's go to the method section to understand the model and the evaluation criteria theory better. So how do we even start with the problem of object detection? In object detection, bounding boxes are often used for predicting the object and different shapes from the image. For the bounding box, our classifier, the YOLO algorithm, predicts x and y, which are the left upper side corner coordinates, and they predict width and height for the bounding box, and the confidence for the bounding box. The confidence basically tells from 0 to 1 how likely it is that there is some item, some object inside this bounding box. The goodness of measure in the thesis is measured with precision. Precision basically considers out of all true predictions, how big portions are actually true. An example for the thesis could be that if we predict full pallet, with what probability we get it right. The recall then is out of all true values, how big portion are we predicting as true? For the thesis we can think of this then that out of all full pallets, how many of them we get correct? Such that if we have 1000 pallets that we need to recognize and we recognize only 700 pallets, then we get 70% recall. Intersect of a union, as referred to as EOU, is seen on the right side. The orange box represents the predicted bounding box, and the blue represents the actual object shape that is approximated with a box also. As a nominator, we can see that there is the intersect between the two boxes, and it is divided by the union of the boxes. So why are not we taking intersect directly? This is because otherwise the predicted bounding box could be of any size, and it might be that the classifier would actually output just huge predicted bounding boxes because the intersect would be all that matters. Now that we have two different metrics, we might wonder how do we maximize these metrics? For machine learning model, it's good to have a single metric what is tried to be maximized or minimized. In our case, we chose F-score that would be maximized. With F-score, the precision and recall are combined such that we can define is the precision or is the recall more important for us. We can define this importance with the beta parameter. For example, if we set beta as 0.5, the precision is twice as important as recall. On the other hand, if we set beta as 2.0, then recall is twice as important as precision. In this work, we set the beta to be 0.5, which means that we think that precision is twice as important as recall. This was done because if the pallet is classified wrongly, then the automated guided vehicle would take the pallet to a wrong position in the warehouse. Then the people in the warehouse would have to sort the pallet to a new location. As defined previously in the research questions, one of the questions considered what is the optimal way to subsample the video data. Two different subsampling techniques were compared: constant sampling and unique sampling. Basically, constant sampling takes every nth frame. This is seen as the baseline sampling. Unique subsampling takes the frames where most unique pallets are seen. This is done by first calculating the embeddings for each of the pallet, and from these embeddings the most unique ones are found and data subset which contains these pallets is created. Before deep learning, object detection required multiple steps. As seen in the figure, the input image is first put to a region selector, to feature extractor, to classifier. Each of these three steps had to be designed individually and different hyperparameters had to be tuned. This required in multiple steps that were unnecessary. With deep learning, only single model is needed. The image can be sent to deep learning object detection algorithm, and the algorithm will automatically do regression for the bounding box, do classification for the object, and feature extraction for the object. All of this is done end to end, such that the parameters of the network are automatically learned through different optimization methods. This simplifies the training greatly, as we don't have to have priors or any previous knowledge about what kind of objects we are going to recognize. In this figure, the outline of the YOLO algorithm can be seen. On the left side, the input image is divided to a grid. This grid ensures that every part of the image is predicted evenly, such that we won't miss any objects. Then, it is seen that the image is sent to upper branch and a lower branch. The lower branch, in this case, classifies each of the grid cells as some kind of object that we have defined. The higher branch then does bounding box predictions for each of the grid cells. These predictions are numerous and they will be filtered down to the final step, after which the both of the branches are combined such that we get the best bounding boxes and the classification results for those best bounding boxes. This slide combines how YOLO output actually looks like. The same kind of output is for all YOLOs the same since the version 3 up to the version 7. Basically, after the image has been put to the YOLO algorithm and the YOLO predicts the outputs, the predictions are done for different grid scales. Different grid scales are used such that we can find different shapes and sizes of objects. For each grid cell, then we can see what are predicted. On the upper right corner, we can see that there are anchor boxes. These anchor boxes are basically placeholders for the bounding boxes, such that for each anchor box we predict the x and y coordinates, the width and the height of the anchor box, and the confidence for the anchor box. Also, we will predict the class scores after the anchor boxes. If we have Cn classes, then we will be predicting probability from 0 to 1 with logistic classifier for each of the classes, such that we can have multiple classes inside one grid cell. Then let's move to the actual implementation details. The walkthrough for the implementation goes as following. First, we collect the data with the video camera. Then we annotated the data, dividing the workload between each member in the team. Then we divided the data into different kind of subsets based on the subset size and based on the subset subsampling technique. We trained model for each of the subsets and compared these models. The data was collected in videos as defined before. The training and the validation videos were collected during the same time and with the same items. The test video was collected few hours after the training and the validation videos, and it contained different items that were found from actual production. This difference was because we could not access the items that were used in production during while videoing the training and the validation videos. The distribution between empty and full pallets are quite even, but the largest difference is in the validation video, where there are significantly more empty pallets than full pallets. An example of the differences between training and validation and test data can be seen here. The training and validation data consisted mostly of some trash and some random objects, as seen in the left figure, and the test data consisted of actual production items, as seen on the right figure. Different data subsampling techniques were also compared. The embeddings were calculated for the pallets and they were visualized in 2 dimensions. On the left figure, we can see the embeddings computed for the data subset that contains every 100th frame subsampled. It can be seen that the data forms clusters. One of the clusters is marked with a black circle. On the right figure, we can see that the unique subsampling produces quite evenly distributed embeddings. This can be seen as more robust than the constant sampling, which produces the embeddings naively and might create clusters. It is assumed that the model that has more diverse data instead of clustered data will perform better. For the data annotation, we divided videos such that every person, we were 3 people in the project, would have 1 video to annotate. The annotation was done as following. On the left side, you can see the pallets that will be annotated as empty pallet. This considers all pallets that have either nothing or then just plain A4 paper. This paper might be left at the bottom of the pallet after the part is taken from the pallet, as the part is brought to the assembly station on top of a A4 which describes what the part is. Then all of the rest pallets, which would have trash, box, whatever on the bottom, they would be annotated as full pallets. The data annotation was done with Computer Visual Annotation Tool, CVAT, as it provided linear interpolation, which means that we can actually annotate videos and not just single images. During the model evaluation, it was seen that there were differences in the data annotation. The data annotation was done between 3 people. 2 of the people annotated the training videos and 1 of the people annotated validation and testing videos. How the training videos were annotated can be seen on the left figure. The pallet is annotated as empty pallets when the 3 bottom legs of the pallets are seen. And the annotation for the validation and test videos are seen on the right figure. The pallet is annotated as empty pallet only when the pallet bottom is visible. This created a difference between training and testing and validation data, such that the model is trained to recognize pallet earlier that is seen in the evaluation data. The results can be seen later. Next, let's take a look at the evaluation and the experiments. In the table, each of the trained model precision, recall and F0.5 score are compared against each other. F0.5 score again means that the precision is weighted double as important as recall. From the table, it is seen that the largest model, the model trained with the largest data subset, produces the best results, going down quite linearly. The trends, however, are hard to see from this table, so let's visualize the performance. Visualizing the F0.5 score against the subset size gives us nice visualization of how the performance decays when the subset size goes smaller. This figure also shows us nicely that unique sampling produces more robust results and it yields constantly higher results than constant sampling. Constant sampling, however, outperforms unique subsampling with the data subset size of 0.5%, and this was thought as an outlier performance. This could be that the constant subsampling just was lucky when choosing the samples, such that the annotation mistakes or annotation differences were minimized and the best performance could be achieved. However, the unique sampling seems to produce more robust and in general higher performance than the constant sampling. This answers our third research question, which goes that unique subsampling performs better than the constant sampling. The second research question can also be answered from the figure. If we take a look at the figure, a technique known as elbow technique can be used here. As the data is in logarithmic scale, we can see when the trend changes in the figure. When we compare the subsets that are smaller than 1% and higher than 1%, we can see that the F5 score decays much more rapidly when the subset is smaller than 1%, compared to subsets higher than 1%. We can therefore conclude that the 1% is the optimal subset size. F-score is great for measuring the general performance of the model, but when we need to know actually how we perform on the end case, we have to use different metrics. Here we have visualized the errors on the conveyor belt. The middle coordinates of the pallets are taken from the pallets that have been predicted erroneously. On the left, full pallet predicted as empty are visualized, and on the right, empty pallets that are predicted as full are visualized. We can see that the errors are always on the left side, and we can actually realize that these errors are the annotation mistakes. The model predicts that the pallet is already a pallet when it's visible, but the validation data says that it's not yet pallet until the bottom is visible. However, as a conclusion, we can say that the model performs perfectly on the important location, which is at the end of the conveyor belt. The same visualizations can be done for the test data. With test data, we actually see that the errors are more numerous and they also overlap with the important locations. It was discussed before that the test set was actually out of distribution test data, so from this slide we can conclude that the model does not generalize to new objects that well. So then we can draw to the conclusions. To answer all of the research questions, YOLO version 7 trained with 1% uniquely sampled data is suitable for the application. This basically concludes that YOLO is suitable for pallet detection, the optimal subset size is 1%, and the optimal subsampling method is unique subsampling. Also, as a broader impact, it can be said that the most important evaluation metric in object detection is relative to the end use case. We saw that heat maps were useful for communicating with the stakeholder and for model interpretability. We also saw that alignment with labeling strategies is crucial for measuring success, as most of our errors came from misaligned labeling.